This recording has been done to help you with Chapter 2 of the subject guide. The material here introduces you to the methods of social research and how sociologists go about research. We're very lucky today to have Eileen Barker of the London School of Economics. Eileen's been a professor here for the last 40 years, and she's done a very, very important set of studies on a particular topic on the Moonies. Professor Barker, you've been a professor here for so many years, researching in philosophy, sociology of religion and general sociology. Can you let us know how you got interested in this topic of sociology and particularly the sociology of religion?
Well, I suppose vulgar curiosity is the best way of describing it. I'm just very curious about people and how they behave. And I'm also interested in the individuals, but their reaction with other individuals and the groups and the social situation that they find themselves in. And then if you add religion, which is a terrifically powerful force for good or for evil, this adds that extra something. So that added to my curiosity, how people could believe in all sorts of things. Some people believe in this and other people in that, and what the consequences of these beliefs might be.
We as sociologists make a claim that we have a particular way to understand sociology and social life, and it's different from the other ways. For example, a priest, or for example, a journalist, or maybe even a psychologist. How is sociology different from the way that these others look at social life?
Well, sometimes we ask slightly different questions, but these overlap with the questions that we ask in ordinary everyday life. And our method is perhaps more rigorous, more systematic. We have certain techniques and we have ways of looking which are perhaps slightly different from the ways that we look in everyday life. But it's not that different. It's sort of honing it up, making it slightly more efficient and reliable, perhaps.
And rigorous?
And rigorous. We hope so.
We hope so.
Sometimes it's sloppy, but it shouldn't be.
So a good sociology would be rigorous and backed up by evidence.
Yes.
Yes, rather than simply making statements like journalists might do.
Exactly.
So one of the things that students you'll have come across is the difference in Chapter 1 between journalism and sociology, psychology and sociology, history and sociology. And Eileen is a sociologist, and therefore, Eileen, you look at the relationships between individuals and society rather than individuals themselves.
Yes, but you can't look at either without looking at the other, I don't think. And I think a good journalist or a good historian will also look at both.
So the most important thing here is that don't put people in boxes. For example, sociologists, psychologists, there is some overlap, and particularly with history. Even you couldn't research your topic without having some understanding of the history of the movement.
Yes, and the history of religions generally, because you want to see what's happened in the past and how far it's similar and how far it's different.
Excellent. Now, we as sociologists say we've got some expert knowledge. We say we're experts in a particular area. But as an expert, you would say, and others say, that you can't do any research unless you have some sort of theory behind it or some way of approaching it. How did you start your research, and what sort of theories did you have in mind when you started thinking about the work on the Moonies?
Well, my actual introduction to the Moonies was almost accidental. I was invited to one of their conferences and I'd never heard of them, and my husband, who worked for the BBC, looked up the file and discovered that it was run by some Korean messiah who the Director of Public Prosecutions was looking into, and that he brainwashed people and did all sorts of evil things. So my husband said, well, you better not go. And I said, well, nothing's going to stop me now.
So this is really quite exciting. So as you were saying, something excited you and got you moving. But in terms of trying to think about the research, you must have had an idea about how to go about it, some theorising about the particular problem. What sort of theorising did you do before you got to this stage?
I don't know that I did a lot before I got to that stage. It sort of happened as I got to that stage. I mean, I went along and I said to myself, are they all brainwashed?
Yeah.
Are they here of their own choice? How could they join a group like this? What are the sort of processes that go on that can persuade somebody to do something that the rest of us think is absolute nuts? And to believe things that we don't believe.
So these questions came up as you were doing research. As you were thinking about it, the questions started popping up. How can they? Why did they?
Yes.
So in the textbooks, you see that you can't do any research without theorising. you can't do research without theorising, but the theorising might come as you're doing the research.
Well, you've got to know what you're theorising about.
Yes.
So in a sense, I had to know, not particularly know particular Moonies, but I had to know that the Unification Church existed and that it posed a problem. And the problem was that everybody seemed to think that they were wicked, awful and terrible. Whereas when I actually met them, they thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And, you know, there was some conflict there that I wanted to resolve. So then I had to ask questions at a more theoretical level. Well, what would it mean to say that they were brainwashed? What does brainwashing mean? Now, obviously, brainwashing is a metaphor. You don't take somebody's brain out and wash it. So you had to think, well, what do I mean by brainwashing, by freedom, by determinism, by choice?
So these are key concepts, and you can't conceptualise without thinking or theorising, which is one of the themes we have in the subject guide and one of the themes we have in the reasoning. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the use of the concepts, particularly brainwashing, particular choice. You've mentioned the Moonies several times, and so have I. As studying methodology and religion is key to our area and most sociologists, it's a wonderful example where you put the methodology about how you could find out about Moonies, about their behaviour, and the topic of religion. The title of this book, and it's a very important book, and I have it here for you just to see, it's called The Making of a Moonie, a Choice or Brainwashing. And students are very intrigued by this title, The Making of a Moonie. Now, in Chapter 3, you'll have come across and will come across phenomenology, social constructivism. The idea of a Moonie is made, they're not born as Moonies, and it's very key to here. And then, again, the question, choice or brainwashing. Again, it was published in 1984, and I gather you've been asked to do it again at the second edition, which would be fantastic. And they're really, really intrigued. The students are really intrigued by this title, which relates to ideas of free will and autonomy, which is central to our principles unit. Professor Bruck, can we start about what is a Moonie and what do they believe?
Well, Moonies are called Moonies, though they don't like being called Moonies. They're really unificationists, because they belong to the Unification Church, or at least that's one of the names. There's the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity.
Oh my goodness.
It took me a long time to say that. But they have lots and lots of different names and different aspects. But anyway, they were started by somebody called Sun Myung Moon in Korea. And it's his name that's used. That's why they're called Moonies, because they are followers of Moon. And Moon, when he was 16, he received a visit from Jesus while he was praying in the mountains and had lots of talks with Buddha and other religious leaders and indeed with God. And God said that he had chosen him to fulfill an important mission on earth, bringing the kingdom of heaven on earth, restoring all the sins that had gone on in the past. And there's quite a complicated theology. People sometimes think that it's very simple. It's not. It's got lots of different aspects to it, which I won't go into now. But it is a definite religion. There's no doubt about that. But Moon saw himself as the Messiah. Jesus failed, or rather his mission failed, because he was killed before he could get married.
Could you say a little bit about what a Messiah is for students, because they might not know this term?
Well, it's somebody who's going to, well, Jesus was seen as a Messiah, somebody who comes from God in order to bring about God's kingdom on earth. It takes various different forms. But the Son of God, as far as Jesus is concerned, is the best known in the West, certainly.
So you're defining Mooney religion, or the Unification Church, as a religion.
Yes.
Because why is it a religion and not a belief system or a belief in fairies or belief in Marsman or something?
Well, of course, any concept such as religion or anything is man-made, usually man-made, sometimes women-made, but usually man-made. And we decide what we're going to call it, and different people use it in different sorts of ways. And I think a very important distinction is between the way that it's used in everyday life, and we can say, well, by religion he means this. We report what people mean. And then as a social scientist, we have stipulative definitions, which is by religion I mean, and for the purposes of this study I mean such and such. So sometimes religion means any sort of belief system that answers questions of ultimate concern. Sometimes it's defined more narrowly to mean a belief in a supreme being or God. So you have functional or substantive definitions they're sometimes
This is
called.
very important, this idea of functional definitions, what religion does rather than what religion is, which is a substantive definition. And if you study the religion chapter later on in your studies, you'll come across that very, very important divide. But how do you define religion?
Well, it depends what I'm doing it for. I mean, sometimes I'll use a very wide definition, sometimes I want it smaller. I can choose. There isn't a right or wrong.
Right.
The concept is more or less useful.
Yes.
And people come along and say, is that a religion or is it a cult? Well, it depends what you mean by religion, depends what you mean by cult. And people mean different things. And part of the sociology of knowledge is understanding what people mean and how they use, and often cheat, will use it one way for one purpose. So they'll say, oh, that can't be a proper religion because they don't believe in God. And then you say, well, is Buddhism a religion? And they'll say, well, yes, of course it is. But a lot of Buddhists don't believe in God.
Is Marxism a religion?
Well, that depends what you mean by religion. Some people would say it is.
So
it's useful for comparative purposes to see what it is like if there is a belief in God and if there is not, if you're looking at an ideological system.
So it's very important to define what you mean by a concept, and this is what we call is operationalizing concepts in sociology. This is what I mean. This is how I'm going to use it in this respect.
Yes, operationalizing, I think, more of that we have to be absolutely clear what we mean so that we can recognize if we come across something. But the operationalizing is when we take more abstract concepts, like choice, for example, and try and see how you can recognize it if you come across it in the street or wherever. I think you use in your book class as another concept. You can't just talk about it without showing how you would recognise it.
And making some indicators.
Empirically.
Yes, having indicators for that. You bring the question of choice, which is really important, and brainwashing or choice. Brainwashing, you indicated you just can't take your brain off and wash it, but it generally means that somehow people are not able to be rational or make free choices, that they somehow are determined from external forces and do things they would otherwise not do. Here's your counterfactual. But in terms of autonomy and free will, is that a central question that you were asking? Were Moonies somehow brainwashed or were they not? Is that at the core of your research?
Yes, in this book it is. It's trying to understand the extent to which a social environment pushes somebody in a certain direction or repels other people, because a lot of people who were subjected to the same, quote, techniques said, thanks very much, I don't want to be a Moonie. So it worked with some people, and it's this dynamic between the individual and what is on offer outside. Now, throughout history, from the Greek philosophers and possibly before, there have been arguments about what free will is, what is determinism, what is fatalism. And these are all very interesting, but very often people just start from the assumption. In the social sciences, you'll get people who say, human beings are free and they make choices, therefore you can't be properly scientific. And then the other ones who say, no, we're all determined by the environment that we're in. And I think it's fairly obvious that there is a bit of both going on the whole time. We grow up in a society. In fact, feral children who grow up without other people.
Feral children, wolf children, the idea that without socialisation, children will somehow be wild. For example, Romulus and Remus, that's what you mean by feral children.
Yes, who aren't given the language and the social concepts and don't learn to interact to get some idea of what it's like to be another person, see things from another perspective.
So in terms of what we'll get in chapter 3, you'll come across a very important idea, ontological assumptions, the idea of ontology. And one of the key divides in ontology is about whether people are free or not free, whether we're determined or we have autonomy. Could you, in a few words, say what we mean by autonomy and freedom? I mean, you've mentioned a bit about whether we are, but it'd be quite useful for a student to know and how to be able to describe it.
Well, it's very, very difficult because, well, for this particular book, I decided that way I would operationalise choice. And it won't work in all situations, let me stress that. But for this particular study, it could. I decided that I would define choice as the ability at a particular point in time to use what is already in you from your past experience, your genetic makeup, however it got there, whether that was determined or not, but what was there at that time. And you would reflect on this and imagine possible futures. So you could become a Mooney or you could not become a Mooney. Now, if, and this was my hypothesis that I was testing, the theory that I laid it out, if you were brainwashed, then you wouldn't be able to reflect and choose using your own desires, wishes, presuppositions. You would automatically go to become a Mooney. If, however, and this is what I discovered, to go ahead a bit, the majority of people didn't become Moonies, then the individual would be an important variable. They would be responsible for deciding to go along that path or that path. And you couldn't talk about brainwashing.
So the choice comes in here, the choice, the using your resource in order to make that decision and having the information.
To remember the past, to use and have the ability to reflect and imagine possible futures. So there's past, present and future.
That's a really useful way for students to understand, because that's what you meant by choice.
That's how I operationalise choice. Yeah. But I've done other work where I've used choice in different ways, because it's not always appropriate, because there was a particular moment when people said the potential converts were brainwashed when they were at a seminar, a sort of workshop, a residential workshop. And people said, you go to that, you're turned into a Mooney. Not true,
no.
They weren't. Some were, but then you can't just say, oh, well, they were, so they were brainwashed. You have to say, well, why weren't these?
Yeah.
And 90% of them weren't.
That's right.
So obviously you had to then say, well, what is it about these ones which makes them choose that, whereas those ones didn't choose that? And then you start doing some other things where you need comparison, you need control groups, and a whole lot of different techniques come in to try and find out the difference between these two sets of individuals.
So we've talked about concepts and how we operationalise concepts and how they're key. They're key to the concept of ontology, which we'll be talking about in the next session. Now, Eileen, we've gone through your research, showed students about how you did participant observation, talked about the difficulties, the advantages, etc. And we showed that you did a multi-methods. You had surveys and in-depth interviews. In the end, and you said it's like a whodunit, what did you find about the Moonies? Were they brainwashed? Was there choice? Or was it like nearly everything in sociology, it all depends?
I think there was choice. But that doesn't mean to say they weren't under pressure. They were. But it was a resistible pressure. They could resist, and it was reversible, because a lot who joined left after joining, and they discovered that it wasn't fulfilling the desires. What it had seemed to offer didn't work out in the long run. And so that again would seem to demonstrate that they still had choice. They could say, do I want to continue like this? Does this fit in with my ideals, etc.?
One of the criticisms of participant observation or ethnography is it cannot be replicated. You cannot do the study again. Now, one of the things you found out, in fact, that some cults or some religions are important. I mean, in fact, they are quite powerful for individuals. But would you say that looking at other cults and other religions, in fact, people would have a choice? Or would you say it's only typical for Moonies at this stage? You couldn't replicate it across?
I think you can replicate to some extent. And I think in the book I mentioned about BBC Open University producer who came, because I was feeling very lonely, that I was the only person who was seeing the Moonies in the way that I was, because the Moonies saw something absolutely wonderful and the outside saw something awful. And then this producer came and was also staying with the Moonies, which was part of the condition that they made before she could make a film of my work. And she came up pretty well the same as me, which was very reassuring.
Yeah.
But other movements, they're all different. I'm not saying that you never get brainwashing or you never get control. One study that I've been doing for the past 10 years or so is on my favourite terrorist. And this is somebody who joined a movement for idealistic reasons. She wanted to make the world a better place. She was interested in Eastern religion. And so she joined this particular group. And then slowly a whole lot of things happened and took her along a path which ended up with her being prepared to die herself and kill other people. She went onto a plane with something that, luckily, she was overpowered. She went to prison, she returned to the movement, and then after a bit left. And I know her pretty well. But studying the things that happened, so at each point in time, the society, the people she was dealing with, were able to ease her towards a way where she was doing something which was diametrically opposed to the sorts of ideals and reasons that she had come in for. So I'm certainly not saying that the social group cannot brainwash, except I don't like the term brainwash. And I think you have to show what is happening where at each moment in time and why it is happening, how it is happening. So it's all very complicated. And sometimes people say, oh, you say you can never have brainwashing or the Moonies don't get influenced. I don't say that. They were influenced, but not in this irresistible and irreversible way, because it was resisted and it was reversed.
So it wasn't,
and that's a fact.
So it wasn't determinist. It wasn't this idea you come in and somehow you become a Moonie. It's much more complicated than that. And some of that knowledge and some of that sort of experience would help you look at other religions, the actual methods of you did it, but the outcome might be different.
Oh, absolutely, and different for different people, different groups, whether it's old religions, new religions, there are different characteristics. I mean, the world is very complicated, thank goodness.
Thank goodness. I think it's interesting how this particular book has been so influential in explaining how and how not to do research, but also to guard against sort of received wisdom that it always has to be this and it always has to be that.
Let's hope it's always fun anyway.
Well, it must be fun. Now, looking back on this research, and I was your student, same age as you, but I was your student as you're doing it, and I remember you doing it. But would you approach it differently? Would you have attempted to do it a slightly different way, or would you have repeated the same way?
I don't think there are any big differences I'd make. I mean, obviously I made some minor gaffes, but...
For example?
Oh, gosh. Oh, just sort of, well, like wearing my low dress or something, asking questions before people were ready for it. But no, generally speaking,
You'd have done the same, used the same tools?
Oh, yes.
You wouldn't have changed that?
I would have needed all of those, yes.
So would you describe, in terms of explaining why people join cults, or how they join cults, this actually does add to the sum of knowledge?
Yes, it throws out there what one of the options are and how it can work. Yeah.
So obviously you're still involved in the Unification Church. Please note we're not talking about the Moonies, involved in studying the Unification Church. Otherwise you'd be accused of over-involvement. I gather you're still working with them and have known people who were born from members of the Unification Church and are still members. And can you explain what sort of research you're doing now and what are the research questions?
Well, one thing, the publishers want me to do a reissue of the book with a chapter about some of the changes. And I'm interviewing the children of the people I interviewed in the 70s. and also looking and talking to people who've left the movement and who are in.
Yeah.
So I've kept in touch with them, and they've all gone completely different ways. The movement has changed. It is what's known as denominationalised.
Meaning, what does we have in sociology? Again, a list of concepts: sect, cult, denomination, or church. This is very important when you're doing the sociology of religion in that chapter. But could you explain what does it mean to be denominationalised?
Well, it's in opposition to the sect, so that where there's a very sharp tension with society, a sharp boundary drawn between them and us, whereas it's more fluid in the denomination. The denomination is something like the Methodists now, although they started as a sect. And very often, though not always, those religions that are termed sects turn to denominations, grow into, but they don't always. But they have to work hard at not. As second generations and subsequent generations come along, they have to accommodate in a lot of ways. They can't be so black and white and absolute.
And the reaction of the newspapers and journalism and families, has that died down a bit? So the boundaries are far less clear because that reaction to that behaviour has changed.
That is part of the process, yes. So that instead of getting the deviance amplification that you talked about, where each side gives the other side permission to behave a bit badly, more badly because of what the other side has done, it starts to come together more. Grandparents, instead of parents, have good relations with the grandchildren.
And you found that out already, have you?
Oh, yes. Yes, that's
lovely.
been going on for a long time. It isn't complete.
No.
There are still sectarian tendencies. Then when the charismatic leader dies, you get a change from this sort of unpredictable, unaccountable leader to bureaucracy and rationality and tradition, to go use Weber's concepts, all coming in. So the whole tone changes.
I think it's very useful that Eileen brings this up. In Chapter 4, we look at Weber again and looking at action in terms of charismatic leaders. And action is often known as non-rational in that sense because you follow a leader without actually thinking about why, and in terms of means, ends. You actually follow it because you're somehow just want to do it. You feel you have to do it, and therefore the charismatic leader has extreme power. Is someone still alive?
Yes.
He's still alive. So you've still got some research to do. Eileen, thank you very, very much for spending all this time. Students, I hope you enjoy listening to this. There'll be some exercises at each point so you can actually review and research and think about it again. Some of the key concepts that are vital to this guide and vital to the exam in the summer. Eileen, I'm glad you're doing research on the second generation. I hope it'll be the third generation, and I'll interview you in 20 years. Thank you very much. We're interviewing Eileen Barker about her work about the making of a Mooney. Eileen, quite a difficult question, but students love asking this. They're intrigued. What is your theoretical background? What are your assumptions? I mean, they say, is Eileen Barker a Marxist? Is she a Weberian? What is she?
Barkerian.
A Barkerian.
I wouldn't like to call myself an anything or an everything. I believe in taking what is helpful and useful from anyone. I suppose I've been strongly influenced by Weber. If you have to put a label, I'm perhaps social constructionist.
Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman.
Yes.
Yes.
Social construction of reality affected me. Symbolic interactionism, George Herbert Mead. George Simmel have influenced me. But then I just sort of learnt things over the past 100 years as I've been doing all
You're
this
not
research.
100 years.
No, 96.
96 years. So the thing about theory, I mean, Weber, again, with this methodological individualism, moving in interpretivism, trying to find out through the social construction about how we become. These dynamic processes are important. But you've also got a lot of descriptive material, which could help us, empirical material, which could actually help us to understand their place in society. So really, a student wouldn't be right to say, Eileen Barker, the Weberian, she would have to say Eileen Barker, who was influenced by the variety of sociologists. I think it's extremely important, students, because modern sociologists for writing do not necessarily describe themselves as a Marxist, a this. They've been influenced by a lot of other sociologists. I mean, Eileen, you influenced me in my research when I was doing research on the Indian civil service. How did they become good civil servants or civil servants who are on the make? So it's the same sort of question. So it's important to remember that. Now, I sense a sort of critical, sceptical stance. Do you think that this actually helped you do the work on the Moonies? And I said, look, I've got to look at all sorts, not just from the side of the Moonies, but from the people who were attacking the Moonies, not just for the students who did not become Moonies, but the students who did become Moonies. Was this sort of sceptical stance helpful for you?
Oh, I suppose so. I think just going back to my vulgar curiosity, I wanted to know why people think in different ways.
But by doing that, you kept on checking yourself and saying, but I need to know the counterfactual. I need to know why not. I need to know, well, if they did this, why did they not do that?
Yes, is there another way of seeing this?
Yes.
What is the other way? How does the other way work?
And
it's just a sort of...
Is that the training you get as a sociologist at LSE?
Gosh, it's so long ago that I was trained. I suppose I did from some of my teachers.
Anybody particularly that is now famous that you were aware?
Well, she wasn't at LSE, but Mary Douglas influenced me a lot.
Yeah. Well, I know that because when Eileen taught me, Eileen told me about Purity and Danger, a key text and a very, very important one about how we organise our social world. And that was very, very important to me. And I felt when you taught me that actually this sort of tradition had come down, which again was making the sort of familiar strange, rather than taking for granted assumptions that we've been looking at.
Yes, so. she taught me very much the importance of boundaries, crossing boundaries, and how we put things together. And this is, as I was saying earlier, the concepts are made and they have terrific power. So if you draw the line, the boundary, in a different way, there are a whole lot of different consequences. And I think this is incredibly important for the sociologist to understand.
And particularly the work you're doing on the Moonies.
Yes, but not only. You can see it in all aspects of life, how people use words to put things together and keep things apart. And the people who get most worried about Moonies will be Christians, because the Unification Church claims to be Christian, whereas they're far less worried about the Hare Krishna because they're so obviously different and beyond the pale. Yeah. And you can see very often the anti-cult and the counter-cult movements, it's the people who are close, who are threatening the truth, that are seen as the most dangerous.
So some of these seeds might have been sown, which might have been interesting in developing your theories about behaviour in general, rather than just simply the Moonies.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, doing research, particularly participant observation, which takes time, I mean, how many years were you studying them?
Well, I first met them in 1974, and it took me a couple of years to get going officially, though I went in to see them quite a bit during that time. And the book came out in 1984, so altogether it was nearly 10 years. But I'm still doing it. So I'm now studying the second generation. So
children of Moonies.
Yes, the children of the people I interviewed in the 70s. I'm now interviewing.
So you enjoyed studying them? Or?
Yes, on the whole. I mean, sometimes the lectures were incredibly boring, and some of the food was terrible, and I didn't like getting up so early in the morning. And,
were they vegetarian?
No.
They had everything.
No. Sometimes I felt a bit claustrophobic. I went to boarding school, and it reminded me a bit of that, and I would, if possible, try and escape just to sort of breathe and perhaps have the odd glass of wine or something.
It's a bit like a total institution in some ways, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So actually, doing such research, you have to get involved, and of course, there's always a tendency about getting over-involved, but you have to maintain that distance. But
I always found them eminently resistible.
Oh, really?
I never wanted to join, which is another question people are always asking.
Yes, you never wanted to join.
No, but I liked and I still like a lot of the members. And a lot of them have now left, and I'm still in touch with them. I mean, I was in America and stayed for a week with one of the younger second generation people who I've known since she was tiny. And last week I was having a cup of tea in Kensington with another ex-Mooney who I haven't seen for 20 years.
So in participant observation, we often say that, you might change the group, as you did with making the Mooney. But actually, sometimes people are changed by the group, so it's a dynamic view. You explained in your book, and it's very useful to read the book, because there's descriptions about doing research. So it's not just Eileen went and did this research. You actually feel you're there when you're reading it. And some of the activities they engaged in, playing ball and doing lots of other things, but one of the most intriguing one was love bombing. And students write about love bombing. They've got no idea what love bombing is. Is it a bomb thrown into a room with a lot of love? What happens with love bombing?
Rosie, I hope you won't mind my saying something rather personal, but I think you've got the most lovely smile. I really do. And your eyes light up. And this little lock of hair, the way it falls down, is so cute. And, you remind me of somebody who was very, very dear to me.
Eileen, how kind. Oh, that's so nice. I feel I really love now.
Oh, you're getting over the top now.
This is love bombing. It's the idea of making somebody feel very wanted. Is that right?
Yes.
And so you did notice in your surveys that Moonies were slightly more anxious than the control group. And is this a behaviour to sort of encourage them, to make them feel wanted, or is it simply?
I think we all like being liked. I don't think that's peculiar to Moonies.
And actually they do it in many other religions and groups, don't they, to begin with?
Yes, to begin with. And then after a bit, Rosie, sit up. Stop slouching like that.
Yeah.
What are you grinning about?
Yeah.
It sort of should change, but once you've got...
and you learned... Did you have to do love bombing yourself?
No.
No, you never did. You never had to go that far.
No, it's just sort of naturally nice.
Yes. Oh, naturally nice. We learnt that at school, didn't we? Yeah. What were you able to find out about doing participant observation that you couldn't have found out by other means? Was there anything particular that was surprising to you?
Well, there's the whole dynamics of the situation. And after a bit, when they stopped noticing that you were there, which is what did happen, you saw people when they were low, when they were happy. I mean, not just in the artificial situation of asking people questions, but seeing what they're like in the morning, chatting over meals, all sorts of things that you can't possibly get except by being there and watching them.
So it's an ethnographic research. It's looking at people in their natural surroundings.
Yes.
If, as you say, it was natural to be a Mooney, but again, it's natural situation. So you've got the idea of the process about how they become to understand themselves and their role within the Moonies.
Yes, and also the relationships with the leaders, the authority structure. They had sort of a kind of hierarchical organisation. So there was the person who was above you, and there might be the person who was below you. And you saw how they related to that, how they incorporated the theology and used the theology, some people would say, to manipulate members. So the whole dynamics of the situation, you wouldn't get any idea of that just through interviewing or through questionnaire.
Because that could any questionnaire interview then looks at a particular point in time, and looking backwards.
The individual in isolation, and just their aspect of how they related.
And sociology is so important. It's such a relationship between the dynamics of individuals with other individuals, which is so important.
Right.
Did you find detachment difficult? Because I know that, to get involved, to play the role, did you find detachment difficult, or was your training as an actor very helpful in this aspect?
I've not ever found it very difficult. There's always something. But we're all like this in a sense. It just becomes more sharpened when you're doing research. But we're always watching. I mean, you're watching me at the moment and thinking, how do I explain this to the students? But you're listening to me, you're sort of involved, you're reacting to me with your lovely smile. So one does stand apart as well as being involved. And I was involved. with individuals. I was feeling things, but I was observing myself feeling things. But that, again, is something that we do, but we may not always be aware of how much we do it. Sometimes when I went back home after having been with the Moonies or some group for some time, and I'd go for a dinner party, I'd find myself watching what was going on, who was leading the conversation, etc.
Yeah.
A bit more than I wanted to do.
Yes.
I wasn't as relaxed.
It's quite difficult when you're a sociologist, you watch everything.
You do,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a problem.
But some people have found it very difficult.
Yes.
Even William White found it very difficult. I think Howard Newby found it quite difficult at some point. But was it because you did it at weekends and you could come back here to LSE during the week that maybe gave you a chance?
Yes. I think there were two things that friends I've had found that they've had problems. One is just sort of staying for a long time and no escape. But the other one is when they're doing covert research, which I never did.
Covert research is research when the person doing the research doesn't tell the group they're researching on that they are doing the research. And in the States, it's illegal now. It's against all the ethical framework. In Britain, it still happens. And of course, there are varieties. I mean, some people might know that they're doing research in a group, and the other people, the junior members, might not do it. But some of your friends did do covert research. On what sort of area?
There was a student who was doing another cult at the same time as I was doing the Moonies, and he used to come around to my house. But he was doing covert, and he was finding it very, very difficult. Yeah. And eventually he went to the LSE psychiatrist, and he had to come out and explain what he was doing to them. He just couldn't continue because the psychological pressure was so bad.
So it's not just bad for the group that you're researching, it's actually very difficult for you because this sort of double bluff that you're playing, it's quite difficult doing covert research. But also there are ethical problems, aren't there, Eileen?
There are ethical problems, there are psychological problems, and there are also methodological problems. Another friend of mine was doing research on a Hindu group, and she actually converted. I mean, genuinely converted and got initiated. And she thought, oh, my research is really going to be terrific now. But actually it wasn't, because she was a woman. So she was no longer allowed to speak to the men. And all the leaders were men. So she was cut off. Now, she got a very nice idea of what it was like to be a woman there. But she couldn't do, all the other things. Whereas I can go around and ask very impertinent questions because I'm a sociologist. And I get a lot of information because they know that I am detached. I mean, it can be very... Once they know you, you can't just sort of go in and say, I'm a sociologist, tell me everything. Once they know you and they trust you not to tell the leaders or the Daily Mail, then they'll come to you with all sorts of things.
So there's two sorts of attachment here, aren't there? You're detached from them, but also you're detached from the sort of anti-programmers and the family members. You're detached in both ways, so you're sort of a neutral person, so you can be trusted. Why did the Moonies let you do this work?
I don't think they quite knew what they were letting themselves in for. It did take me 2 years to get the sort of full permission.
And so you have to get the trust of the
vetted,
people.
Yes. But that was built up slowly just through knowing individuals.
And sometimes trust, you can actually get over-involved, because by getting into a group and trusting the leaders of the group, and they trust you, actually you can get sort of sucked into things you'd otherwise not do, particularly on criminal activities. People did work on Glasgow gangs and things.
It can be. And with the Moonies, I tried not to go up to the top levels until I knew the bottom levels very well, because that was what I was asking questions about. So it depends very much on the sort of work you're doing.
Were you allowed to see all aspects of Mooney behaviour or Mooney activities? Were some sort of cut off from you?
Well, yes, there were certain things that I didn't get to see or get to know. There weren't many things that I wanted to see for the research I was doing that I didn't. I mean, I didn't find out very much about the finances at the international level. I knew about the sort of local...
Although the Daily Mail would have been very interested in that, wouldn't they?
Well, yes, but the Moonies themselves that I was talking to didn't know. It was just sort of...
So you were what they were interested in, find out their worldview, which is more important than...
Yes, by asking, in this particular case, but each study that I do, I'm asking slightly different questions, and you need slightly different methodology.
And so you think the Moonies thought you were impartial?
Oh, some did, some didn't. Some thought I might be joining, some thought that I was satanic. There's always a great variety.
But
and
if
the
you're
anti-cultists thought that I was a Moonie.
Of course,
And,
by definition, because you didn't come out with saying they are not,
yes,
they are
I
irrational.
mean, anybody who's sort of black and white, this is the truth, that's the falsity, he is the Messiah, he is the Antichrist.
Yeah.
You know, because I wasn't saying either of those, both sides thought that I was wicked and evil.
Were there any dangers in doing the work? Did you ever feel...
Physically, no.
No, you're not. Just boredom
No.
from some of the awful things you had to do, like the lectures, but you didn't feel in danger.
Well, when I first went in America, in California, to the notorious Camp K,
Which is what?
it's somewhere sort of not miles from anywhere, but, you know, not it's, I don't know, about 20, 30 miles from San Francisco. I left my case with a lawyer and said, if I'm not back by Monday, send in the police and sign something. There was no problem. And occasionally I felt at the very beginning a bit frightened.
But otherwise...
But that was me. I mean, I wasn't in any real danger.
No. But sometimes doing participant observation, there's sometimes when it can be dangerous.
Other times I've been in real
Really?
danger.
Can you...
Well, Armenian study in Nagorno-Karabakh. I
Oh my
hitchhiked in a military helicopter for a few days and was being shot at and landing in minefields.
You
and
see
things
what
like that.
sociologists do to get their research
But that's
done?
nothing to do with the Moonies.
No, nothing to do with the Moonies, but it's the idea that, you know, sociologists are living and breathing, but actually take risks to get their data.
Oh yes, I've been in quite a few dangerous situations, but not on this occasion.
Did the families of the Moonies believe you were impartial?
Some did, some didn't. After I'd published this book, about 4 years later, I set up an organisation called Inform to provide information that would be as objective and balanced and reliable as possible about new religions, because it seemed to me there was a lot of unnecessary suffering through ignorance and misinformation, and that the social sciences could produce this, the method of the social sciences would produce more balanced information. And then I got attacked very strongly by the anti-cultists who were saying I was a Moonie, I was a Scientologist, I was a Hare Krishna, etc., etc.
So there was a reaction to research, the research?
Yes, and to the sort of general approach. I mean, people would say, you don't care. Now, I set it up because I did care, but they'd say, because you don't come down on one side or the other, you're just impartial. You're academic and you don't care.
Yeah.
Or you don't really know what goes on. You don't understand the agony. But it's precisely because...
We've now looked at the sort of theoretical background, the reason why Eileen chose the research, and looking at the key concepts about this work and things like the approach about explanatory and descriptive research. Now, can we get to the nitty-gritty? You actually did some research on the Moonies, and you used a variety of methodological tools or tools of research. In section 2, we talk about the different tools of research. And in your book, you very clearly, and it's very useful for students to read chapter 2, where you actually show exactly how you went about the research. Can you explain the sort of methods you used?
Well, I thought it was important to use a variety of methods, and I think normally it is important to use a variety because you're asking different questions of different aspects of the phenomenon. So I wanted to look at the individuals and try and understand where they were coming from, so I knew who joined and who didn't and could separate them. I wanted to look at the social situation, to see them interacting with each other, and see things like, you know, who would sit where, who would decide what songs to sing, or when to go off fundraising, and how people reacted in the presence of other people. But I also wanted to be very rigorous to test hypotheses that I came up with. So to look at the individuals, I did in-depth interviewing, which could last 6-8 hours, one-to-one, going through their lives and all their fears, expectations, worries.
How did you write that up?
I recorded it, and then they were transcribed.
And they knew that you were recording it?
Yes, yes, I did it quite openly. And actually at the very end, when I'd say they were finished, I would leave the recorder on. And again, quite openly, I was always entirely open and honest. Then you would get a whole lot more. And then I would switch it off, and I'd get even more after that. So, you could use the recorder in a lot of different ways as a tool. Then I did participant observation, which was living with them. And that went through various stages. First of all, I would just sort of sit and watch, doing something like washing up the dishes, darning socks, writing out song sheets.
Can you darn socks?
Oh, yes, I'm a brilliant darner. Very good, very good. Used to make all my children's clothes and knit them and everything.
So sociologists do other things than do sociology.
Yes, life's a sociology. So I would do things where I had an excuse to be there and to listen and ask perhaps an occasional question, but not sort of part of the general thing. And so that was a sort of passive stage. Then there was a more interactive stage, and I would talk, and I had learnt the language. They didn't have to translate and explain. They had their own concepts, their own ways of thinking.
How did you learn it? By watching them or just being with them?
By listening and being with them.
So the meaning problem was overcome because you had...
became... I mean, when you go to a new place, if you're a student and you go to university, people are behaving in a slightly different way. You have to learn. You have to be made a student.
So you had to be... made a Mooney? Or?
Exactly. It's like the making of a student, the making of a Mooney. We all learn to play particular roles. We construct and are constructed through social interaction.
So there's your constructed identity, and you learnt the repertoires.
I learnt the repertoires, I learnt how to behave properly, the sorts of ways to dress, the kinds of way to eat, the sort of beliefs that it was okay to express and those that it wasn't, perhaps.
Weren't you reflecting a bit too much? I mean, as you're part of it, but you knew you were a sociologist, wasn't there a sort of dynamic here? You're thinking, am I doing this? What am I doing? Was it quite difficult to do that?
Sometimes one felt a bit schizophrenic, yes, because you're sort of looking down and yet at the same time you're involved. It's a bit like an actor.
And of course you were an actor, weren't you?
I was, and I was trained as one. So you're on the stage, you're crying because something terrible has happened, you want to commit suicide, and the prop man hasn't set the dagger. So you think, oh, crikey, what do I do? But at the same time, you've got the tears. You're aware that you're on stage. You go and you get a letter opener or something and kill yourself. You're always aware. You're aware of the audience. If you're in a comedy, about the laughter. You're aware that you have to be heard at the back of the stalls or at the back of the gods. So there's an awareness, but at the same time, you've sort of sublimated yourself into the character. So there can be real tears. There can be real feelings. And now we're moving on to what's sometimes called Verstehen.
It's Verstehen. Verstehen is a topic you'll come across in Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. It's absolutely vital. It's the German word meaning understanding or empathy, which is... Could you like to explain?
Yeah, it's empathic understanding, which isn't necessarily sympathetic.
No.
But it's putting yourself in somebody else's shoes or looking at the world through their glasses, trying to see how they would see it. And this is going back to, the thing that we were saying before, that the parents were seeing things in different ways. Mm. Now, most of the Moonies are converts. Well, all of them were at some point, because it was a new religious movement. So they all had to learn this. So I learnt with them. Mm. I remember on one occasion it was very hot and I was wearing rather a low-cut dress. And this wasn't principled. And so the resident artist drew a picture of me, only it had the neckline up here instead of down here. And this was a sort of way of gently telling me.
Eileen, don't behave that way.
Exactly.
Did you change the next time?
Oh, absolutely.
My goodness, how
became aware.
Yes.
In fact, I was studying various other groups at the time, and I used to sometimes have to wear different clothes, different times of the day, if I was going to a sort of New Age group, or then evangelicals, or then a Marxist group.
So you were taking on the role, and you had to take on the role including the clothes.
The presentation of self.
The presentation of self in everyday life, again, a key text that you'll be coming across in section 3 and section 4.
The new Mooney converts, another interesting thing here was very often they had long hair, the men, and they weren't told they had to cut it off, but within a few days they all had short back and sides because that was the way that one dressed.
So doing participant observation, you actually got more and more involved, and eventually you actually gave us talk about the Garden of Eden, I gather?
Oh, the lecture that I gave, yes. No, one of the things I had to do was to participate. We all had to give lectures. And it was about the coming of the Messiah. And there was this one girl who was there who had said that she wasn't very sure. But once I'd given the lecture, she understood and it made sense. So she joined. So I was really upset about this. And I said, but I don't believe this. And I'd been saying it. You know, the divine principle, that's their theology, teaches that. I didn't say this is what happened. I was very careful. And the Mooney, who was in charge, immediately came up and said, God has used Eileen to show this girl the truth. And as far as I know, she's still a Mooney. Now, that was really
so,
quite
Eileen,
worrying.
you made a Mooney.
I made a Mooney, but I also unmade Moonies. I didn't say stop being a Mooney, but through my being there and talking to them and sort of crossing the boundary between them and us, which was very strong, they realised that it didn't have to be all black or all white, and some did move out slightly.
So you did participant observation, you did in-depth interviewing, but you also did a survey, didn't you, to compare?
Did.
Would you like to explain a little bit about that?
Yes, I did several actually. The main one was a 42-page questionnaire for all the English-speaking Moonies in Britain and those at the Unification Theological Seminary in America and one or two others. And that asked them a lot of questions. And then I had a control group of people of roughly the same age, the same social background, and I tried to match as many of the variables as I could with this control group, so I could see what was the difference between them. And then I also did a study of people, comparing people who went to workshops, these residential workshops, who did not join with those who did join. So there were the ordinary people who had nothing to do with the church, and those who went and did not join, and those who did. So there was comparison. And that way I could work out and test a whole lot of hypotheses. For example, I had found that quite a few of the Moonies had been abused as children. So I thought, oh, this is...
Wonderfully, a very exciting thing to find, yes. I mean,
exactly.
Awful.
But then I looked at the people who did not become Moonies, and more of them had been abused as children. And lots of times I found that visibility is mistaken for typicality.
Would you like to explain that a bit? Because
yes. Suppose you see in the newspaper, cult member commits suicide. It's perfectly true. There has been somebody in a new religion who's committed suicide. Then you see it again. And you see this 3 or 4 times. You start to think, well, what is it about cults that makes people commit suicide? But you don't recognise that you never see Anglican commit suicide.
No.
It's not news. It doesn't get there. Yes. And yet, the rate of suicide among the Anglicans could be twice that among people in cults. And if you realise that, if you've gone into that and seen what the rate, how many per 1,000 will commit suicide, then the question is not why do people in cults commit suicide, but what is it about cults that stops people committing suicide? So comparison is really important. For a number of reasons.
So this is why it's very useful to do survey research, because it allows you to compare. Sometimes your research is described in the textbooks as triangulation, but actually I'm not sure it is, because you're actually asking different questions by using different methods.
Well, they overlap.
Yes. So would you say it's triangulation?
If you're looking at the individual, for example, when I was living with them, I had a random list of people I was going to interview. And I didn't know who they would be. This was done by numbers and sort of fairly straightforward technique. And then I would see that so-and-so was coming up. Bob Jones, and I think, oh, how boring. Because I'd seen Bob Jones at breakfast, and he really seemed such a bore.
Sometimes the boring people are the most interesting.
When I started to interview him, he would be really exciting.
Yeah.
Alternatively, I would spend hours with this rather exciting, I thought, person, and then interview them. And they hadn't got a thought in their head. Really.
Because interviewing is actually an artificial situation, isn't it?
It gets at something different.
Yes.
Of course it's artificial, I mean, in a sense.
Yeah.
Though what is artificial?
Well, I mean, me sitting talking to you now is not what I usually do. Usually we have coffee and talk about lots of different sort of things, not just Moonies in front of bright lights. It is artificial, isn't it?
Well, no, I don't think it is artificial. I don't know what is artificial. I think I've got very sceptical about the whole idea of artificial. I mean, we're being as real now as we are when we're having our coffee, aren't we?
I don't know. We've been watched by people. I'm not sure we are. But anyway, it's one of the things that sociologists
really being watched.
We're really being watched, and so we might not add what we say in the text. Act normally.
But when we're having a cup of coffee, we might do all sorts of unreal things.
Presentation of self again. If you're in the senior common room, you might want to say, well, look, I'm extremely academic. Or if we're outside, we're terribly cool.
No, we do different things the whole time, which is more real.
I don't know. So one of the things you learn in your textbooks, interviews in an artificial situation, be very sceptical of those sort of terms, because actually, unless you actually know what you're saying or writing about, it can actually be meaningless in an exam. Now we're going to do something very practical now. You said you were interested because it seemed to be extraordinary behaviour. It was a wonderful example to test out whether it's choice or brainwashing. But you can't just go off and do research. You have to have something to support you. Did you have any financial help available, or do you have any other resources that would enable you to do such work?
Well, I was teaching at LSE. I had a full-time job. And first of all, the LSE gave me some seed money to enable me to go and study them. And then I applied for and got money from what was then the ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council. Yes. And they gave me money to cover the research.
Well, they must have thought it was worth it, and a very useful question. Otherwise, they're quite difficult and in fact, tough to give you money. They won't give money just like that. They had to be obviously convinced it was a useful question to answer. Why do you think this was? Because it seemed to be rather a sort of esoteric thing about a religious group in Korea and a man who saw God when he was 16. I mean, why on earth do they think it's worth funding you for this research?
Well, there were all these young people who were joining in the West. Yeah. They were giving up their university careers. They were allowing Moon to marry them off to people who often came from different countries, didn't speak the same language as they did. And they were often handing over their inheritance. And there was, at that time, an enormous fuss about it. It was this sort of scary thing. People were going to join cults, and Moonies were the worst cults.
We're going to talk about the reaction to the Moonies in the next session. But at this moment, it was almost a social problem that required redress.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was actually useful for you to have that sort of problem that required redress, so you could get funding for it. Is it easy to get funding now to do research?
Well, there is money out there.
But
it's easy to get it for some things and not for others.
So some sort of, we hear that research is often done about the impoverished, the young, those in prison, some with problems. We never seem to be able to get money to do research on sort of normal families, normal education. It's always done to people who have some problems. Is that the case?
Well, I don't know, because I haven't actually tried for any. I mean, I got some money recently, actually, for religious and moral pluralism, which was a nationwide survey asking people, normal people, ordinary questions. So it can happen both ways.
All right. So it's important because sociologists can't just go off and do research. It does require funding, and sometimes this funding will determine what sort of research can be done. If you haven't got very much money, you cannot do a huge national survey. You cannot spend hours and hours and years doing participant observation on a full-time basis because you just haven't got the resources. So it's important. Now, you're asking questions. Sociologists ask sociological questions rather than investigating answers to social problems. Can you just outline the key sociological questions of this particular study in Making of a Moonie?
Well, why did people join?
Yeah.
Why did people not join? What were they joining? What happened when they left? What was going on in the movement? What were the power relations? What were the communication structures? What was life like? And then another big set of questions which doesn't come in quite so much in this book, but which I've spent quite a lot of time, is the social reaction to them. Parents being horrified, the growth of the anti-cult movement, trying to destroy all the new religions, or at least warn people about the terrible harm they did. How is it possible that people saw the same phenomenon, the Unification Church, in such different ways, so that for the members, Moon was the most wonderful person in the world, and their lives in the church were the most wonderful kind of lives. Whereas for their parents, this was an evil, scheming, sinister, bizarre, nasty, terrifying movement. And they were both looking at the same thing.
You both using the idea of perception, which is absolutely central. And again, in Chapter 3, we look at phenomenology and look at the concept of perception, which is vital to understanding this particular phenomenon. It is quite interesting. Some of these questions could be answered by descriptive research, and some required explanation. Some wanted to know why they joined, and some were saying, well, who were they? So this difference between descriptive research and explanatory research, again, is central to Chapter 2. Can you define for a student what is the difference between descriptive research and maybe illustrated rather than explanatory research?
Well, I think there can be an overlap. I don't think it's very clear-cut. But descriptive, you're just sort of saying how things are. An explanation, you're trying to say why they are like this. With the explanation, you're more likely to have a hypothesis or a law, or at least a regularity. I don't like laws for social science, but regularity, which is of the hypothetical form. So you're saying, if X, then Y, or if X, then not Y. So here I would say, if idealistic, young, brought up in a house where values are important, then more likely to join than if brought up to make money, consider oneself in a particular kind of way. Yeah. For example, if Catholic, slightly more likely to join than if no religious belief. That sort of thing. So the explanation isn't total. You can't say all Catholics will join or not. In fact, more Catholics who were lapsed Catholics who went to the Moonie workshops told me that they didn't want to become Moonies, but they discovered their spirituality again and went back to the Catholic Church. So I tell my Catholic friends, if you want to get your lapsed Catholics back, send them to a Moonie workshop. But unfortunately, they didn't do it.
So this is explanatory versus descriptive. But your main problem or sociological problem you wanted an answer for was choice or brainwashing. The key question which
yes, but to answer that, you had to ask these other questions. Yes. There's always a hierarchy of questions that you have to ask.
Well, thank you very much. Eileen, we've come to the end of this section. We're going to go on to some more, but we've looked at the key idea of concepts, the reason why you used the book, used the research, the way you did the research, and the key questions and the conceptualization, which is absolutely vital for this part. Thank you very much. You suggested a key sociological problem is trying to understand why some people think somebody is totally rational, some people think it's totally irrational. This sort of misunderstanding or incomprehension is very important in understanding social life. And that's why this particular study is useful for illustrating this. You also said that the Moonies' families were very worried about their children's behaviour, and other people were particularly concerned, like the Daily Mail, who sort of had a whole campaign about them. I mean, I remember, watch out, there's a Moonie about, and I think it was only about 500 Moonies or something extraordinary. Can you explain why was there such tremendous antagonism. That's the first part. And the second is, why do they consider their children to be irrational?
Well, one of the editors of the Daily Mail had a Mooney child, I think.
Oh, I see.
So, but the people who joined the Unification Church did tend to come from middle-class families who had influence and who had planned certain things for their children. And here were these children going off and selling things on the street, marrying people who, well, there was quite a lot of racism there as well, but people who they didn't know. They were arranged marriages. And they were giving up everything that their parents had planned for them. And they were bright, intelligent people. They weren't dimwits. One of the things I discovered by comparing them with Control Group was that it wasn't the pathetic, stupid people who became Moonies. It was a subsection of the rather bright, well-educated people. And so this gave an even greater question: why would these intelligent young people want to do something that seemed so irrational? Now, of course, rational depends, it works from certain assumptions. If you believe certain things, then other things follow. If you believe that the world is in a terrible mess, people are killing each other, that there's unfortunate things of all sorts going on, criminal activity, cruelty, then you want to do something about it. If you believe that there is a man on this earth who's in touch with God and who has the blueprint for saving the world and bringing the kingdom of heaven back, who can explain why we're in the mess that we are, and there is an explanation tied up with what happened in the Garden of Eden, where they believed that Eve had sex with the Archangel Gabriel and then had sex with Adam so that their children were Satan-centred rather than God-centred. And the whole idea is to restore the situation to the Garden of Eden. If you believe all that, then you might believe that you should do something about it. You should follow the Messiah. And it makes very good sense to do this. And the translation of this fall in the Garden of Eden is that the suffering in this world is through the misuse of the most powerful of all forces, love. And it can make a kind of sense after a bit if you suspend some assumptions and take on board other ones. Now, if you try and explain that to somebody, just sort of saying, oh, well, Eve had sex with Lucifer in the Garden of Eden, they think you're nuts. Yeah. But if you can come to accept this and read the Bible in a particular way, then this can make sense. And if you just think of all the different kinds of Christianity, let alone Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc., that there are, people do make different worlds. They see things in different ways, and some things fit and other things don't.
So it's rational for them because it makes sense to them.
Yes.
But other people think that their behaviour is totally irrational. I think it's very important, students, to realise that Eileen's talking about is a belief system, not what Eileen believes. And I think this is an important aspect. This is a description of a belief system about why people behave in the way they do, because they believe that if this happens, this will happen. If you believe in love, and you believe that love actually will conquer all, and that we have to somehow purge the world of its iniquity, then you will follow a particular line of belief. But the parents and the Daily Mail and all the sort of pressure groups were trying to say, look, these people are irrational. We somehow must get rid of this religion because it is irrational. It was a very, very strong attack.
Look at the difference, some of the Islamic ideas and fights that are going on at the moment. Look at what's been happening in Sri Lanka.
Yes.
People with different worldviews, whether they're Marxist, Maoist, Christian, Islamic, throughout history, the Crusades, the Inquisition. The Inquisition was saving people, like the Cathars, by burning them at the stake.
Yes. But it's rational for them.
Well, they see the world in a particular way that makes sense and is rational. And we all see the world in a different way.
Yes.
So if you bring in religion, where you can't test out whether God is doing this or not, you have this leap of faith.
And in sociology, we don't say whether things are or as they're not. We find out why people act in the way they do, given their background and experiences, etc. So we're not saying this is the case or this is not the case. We want to know how people are behaving.
You have to be methodologically agnostic.
Could you explain that? It's a wonderful term.
Well, agnostic means we don't know.
Yes.
So an atheist is saying there's no God. A theist says there is a God. And an agnostic says, I don't know. And I've no way of finding out. So, to go to Karl Popper and the whole idea about scientific discovery, for anything to be scientific, it must be irrefutable.
Can you explain what refutable means?
It means you must be able to show that it is otherwise. So I can say, I am the Virgin Mary. You are not able to show
that you're not.
That I'm not.
Because it's incapable of disproof.
And I think the example Popper uses is something like people will commit suicide because they have the death wish, but they won't commit suicide because they have the life wish. So you can just say, oh, well, that was because.
Yeah.
But actually you can't disprove it because there's always a way of proving it.
Yeah, so all swans are white can be disproved, which is the classic one.
Exactly.
Yes. So the refutable. So for a statement to be scientific, according to Popper, it must be refutable.
That's right.
We come to this question that is introduced in the chapter 1, which is the difference between social problems and sociological problems. I want to bring this up again, because one of the things we do in sociology is make the familiar strange. Are you in danger of making the strange, the behaviour of this particular group, familiar? I mean, it seems to be the reversal.
I hope so.
You hope so? Tell me.
Well, I hope to be able to make people understand why other people do things that seem strange.
Yeah.
At the same time, I want people to be able, in a sort of Monty Python sort of way, to look round corners and see how the things that we do that seem familiar and ordinary to us are actually a bit weird.
Yeah.
And, in a Christian country, we could say, OK, you think the Moonies are funny, but what about Christianity? People drinking the blood of a man who was born of a virgin and died 200 years ago and then rose again. I mean, if you're telling that to a man from Mars, he's going to think it's peculiar. If you say that to somebody in the West or somebody who's been brought up as a Christian...
It's blasphemy. It's blasphemy, Eileen.
Well, it is.
Yes.
But you're actually only saying what the people
believe in. So this thing about social problems and sociological problems, you were looking at the reaction to the Moonies and their families' reactions to the Moonies as a sociological problem. You weren't looking at it as a problem, as the newspaper or the Daily Mail would look at it.
Yes. One of the reasons why I do this sort of research is because it is a social problem as well. Now, you have to make the difference between the social and the sociological problem. And you have to, I think, make a difference between choosing a problem.
Yeah.
If you just study something that is of no interest, well, certainly you won't get the money.
Exactly.
But what's the point?
Yes.
So you want to have some... And to me, if the Moonies were brainwashing, then that's a problem. If they weren't, then there was a whole lot of deprogramming, kidnapping people from the movement and deprogramming them until they sort of said, we don't believe anymore, or rushing back, escaping to the movement. That was a problem if you've got a whole lot of thugs doing it, which you had.
Yes.
And so that is why I wanted to present the sociological problem of, well, are they brainwashed? What is going on here? And find that out as rigorously, objectively as possible. That's the data bit. And then afterwards, once you've got the information, what do you do with it? And that's when your values might start coming in again.
I think this is an extremely important debate, because in many of the textbooks you say that there's a social problem, a sociological problem. But you've identified something very, very important. The idea that if it wasn't a social problem, nobody would be interested in it, and actually it wouldn't have fired you up as a topic. Also, we want to know why social problems become social problems, the actual process. And we call this, particularly in deviance, the amplification of deviance. Why does some activity is suddenly, like mugging, considered to be suddenly a social problem? So when you're answering questions about social problems and sociological problems, don't say, these are this and these are not this. Actually, there is a very, very strong relationship.
There is, but it's a relationship between different things.
Yes.
So you have to analytically separate them and then understand the reaction between them, where the social problem leads to